Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I think a little bit lukewarm today. Nah, good. You know, it's quite amazing because I've attended other workshops. Usually, like, somewhere in the middle of the whole series, you see people stop coming, or very few people will turn up. But look, John, look at, the turnout, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is workshop 5. So we've got this and another one. And I don't have, I think I'll just introduce the monks and the nuns. We've not changed the schedule, so it's pretty much the same. Okay, so as usual, we have Ajahn Brahmali and Venerable Sunyo, who's our teachers for today's workshop. And we've got Venerable Mataji from Bodhiana. And today, we've got 10 nuns. I'm really excited, 10 nuns. Ah, okay, but good enough? Yes, still good?
Somebody needs to become a nun right now.
To make up that number.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have back here, we've got a few nuns who's been here. So Venerable Munisara, we've got Venerable Pasada, we've got Venerable Upeka, Venerable Gotami. I'm very pleased that Venerable Gotami will be doing the guided meditation today, so that will be at 3 o'clock. So thanks, Venerable Gotami, for doing that. We've also got Venerable Karunika, Venerable Janti. See, I have to keep looking at my phone. People think oh, Leha, you're really good. You remember all the nuns' names. I'm like, yeah, I visit the nuns' monastery quite regularly, but sometimes I know them in their lay names, and then when they become nuns, I say, what is Robin's name now? Can't remember. So Karunika, we've got Venerable Janti, we've got Venerable Acharya, Venerable Paramita. She's the one who's not here. Okay, Venerable Sorata, and Venerable Pasana. Okay, so with that, let me hand over to the teachers for another exciting workshop.
Very, really exciting, super exciting. Dependent origination, yay, exciting. Anyway, welcome everyone again. Welcome to all the Venerables. Nice to have you all here again. And so we're going to continue, and I'm amazed how people are still hanging in there. Yeah, it's good, well done, hanging in there after all this kind of mind-boggling stuff on dependent origination. So that's really marvelous. So we're going to, surprise, surprise, continue where we left off last time. So we have, it's actually already on the wrong slide. It's supposed to just be, no, supposed to be at the beginning. Okay. Now we can move forward.
Excellent.
Yeah. So last time we had a look at the links or the factors of dependent origination that have to do with consciousness and the nama rupa, the mental aspects and form, and also a little bit about the 6 sense bases and sense impressions, the phassa in Pali. And these are all about, basically these are about how we perceive things, and also about how consciousness and a person sustains themselves in samsaric existence. And today we're going to move forward. We're going to look at the aspects we see here of sensation, which is Vedana, or often called feeling in translation. Tanha, often called craving. Sometimes people like words like desire or wanting, as for Tanha. And then we have this exciting word Upadana, which Venerable Sunyo is going to talk about in quite a bit of detail, which refers to a number of different things. But 2 of the main ideas is the idea of taking up and fuel, but actually I would say it's even a bit more broad than that as well. Occasionally, I will show you a sutta later on, occasionally it also means things like grasping or even attachment, depending on the context, of course. So these factors are all about, again, the activities that we do in the world based on defilements or based on avidya, on ignorance and all of that. Is very similar to the very beginning of the path, where we started out with ignorance and willed activities or willed actions. This is an alternative way of looking at the very beginning there, ignorance and willed actions, This is an alternative presentation of the same process that you see at the very beginning here. And this is kind of what is interesting about dependent origination. This is why it is structured as a 3-lifetime thing. The reason is simply to be able to bring out some of the different kind of ways of looking at this particular sequence. Yeah? You see it from 3 different ways. And of course, that is very useful because it expands our ideas about what is going on here. So we will also, towards the end of the course, or towards the end of the day, we're also going to be looking at the next 2 factors called here life or existence, and the very last one, which is rebirth. I should actually put rebirth there rather than birth, but anyway, too late now. So jati. So this is it. Yeah, this is what's going to happen today. So let's see what this means in practice. Vedana paccaya tanha. We have from the condition of sensation, there is craving. Sensation is a condition for craving. And this is, as I mentioned last time, this is actually quite interesting and quite profound. And one of the things that is always interesting is to consider why the Buddha uses particular terms or particular words or particular aspects of the khandhas or particular way of presenting the Dhamma at certain points. Yeah, we have just seen the idea of contact before, how we contact, how we have a sense impression of the world. And from that sense impression, of course, our experience of the world arises from sense impression. But our experience of the world really is called 5 khandhas. Yeah, that's really what it means. 5 khandhas are really the experience of the world, the 5 aspects of personality. Form, yeah, feeling, perception, willed actions, and consciousness. This is really what it is about. So it is interesting here that the Buddha picks out sensation or Vedana or feeling as the one aspect that he talks about. So why does he do that? And as I mentioned last time, he doesn't really say this anywhere. This is just my kind of speculation, yeah, or maybe informed speculation, if you like. Is that sensation is what gives meaning to existence. Without sensation, there's nothing of value in the world. There's no way to prioritize things. There's nothing to give you an impetus to move forward. There's nothing to give you an impetus to do anything at all. Yeah, without feeling, you would just be lying there. You would be like a dead log, and nothing would really work. Everything we do in the world is somehow based on feelings. Yeah, the fact that you are still coming here after 4 punishing weekends. Yeah. Means there must be some good feeling as well. Yeah, it's not just bad. There's some positive feelings there as well. So you come here, and because of sensation. Why are you Buddhists? Yeah, again, it's because of sensation, because it feels right. It gives the right kind of. It gives us a purpose, sense of meaning. Yeah, it feels good in a certain way. Why are we monastics? Exactly the same thing again. Why do we do anything in life? Why do you work? Why do you, all of these things? It all comes down to sensation, what gives meaning and purpose and value to anything in life. And of course, you can see, once you get that, you can start to see why this must give rise to craving. Yeah, because sensations are always changeable, and because sensation is about the very meaning of life, then if our life is going to have any meaning, it must then give rise to craving, because we want to give value to our life. Without value, again, nothing really works out. So craving has to arise because this is such a fundamental part of existence. And there is an interesting sutta which just comes to mind now, actually, which I should have added in here. And that is a sutta in the Numerical Discourses where the Buddha says something to the effect that I teach to beings who feel. Yeah, beings who feel, that's who I teach. In other words, it's only beings who feel who are able to connect to this Dhamma. Does that mean that there are beings that don't feel? It probably doesn't mean that at all. It just means that feeling is such a fundamental aspect of the teaching. that is kind of what enables you to make sense of these things. Yeah. So beings who feel, really, this is what the teachings are for. The Four Noble Truths are about that. Feeling is so kind of fundamental to what this is about. So from sensation, which gives life meaning, then we have craving. And of course that craving then is based on the idea if something has a positive value for you, you think, yeah, this is positive. Remember when we talk about sensation here, something being a positive feeling, it doesn't just mean that you are indulging in things. I'm so happy I'm indulging in sensual pleasures or whatever. It is much broader than that. It is about things that give meaning to your life, give purpose, give a sense of fulfillment, of contentment, and all of these kind of things. Happy feeling, happy sensation is incredibly broad. It's not just a kind of hedonistic thing, I'm going to indulge in the world of sensual pleasures. It's a very broad range of things. And in the same way, so we crave for those things that give us meaning in this way. And of course, if you have a negative sensation, you have aversion towards it. You have a negative feeling towards it. The word aversion in English, often these days it is used as a synonym for ill will, but actually it doesn't really mean ill will. Aversion means that you are pushing away from something. It's like you go to a rubbish tip, yeah? And if you go to a rubbish tip, it really stinks, and you think, oh, let me get out of here as soon as possible. It doesn't mean you have ill will to the rubbish tip. Yeah, I want to burn down this rubbish tip, and I want to explode it with a nuclear bomb or something. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means you want to get out of there. You want to get away. And that is the difference between aversion and ill will. Yeah, aversion is just, oh, don't want to see it. Ill will is like, oh, I'm going to do something bad about it. Of course, aversion can lead to ill will, but it's not exactly the same. So in this way, then, we are driven by sensation, by craving. So a large part of the Buddhist path, then, is to somehow, we talked about it before, about kind of ending craving. Yeah. So how do we then end craving? If craving is so closely connected to this thing we call sensation, which is so close to our heart and is so important to give life meaning and all of this, how do we actually sever, if you like, that link? How can we do something about craving? And this becomes really important. One of the problems of craving is that it tends to really dominate our minds. We are attracted, we are kind of pulled around in the world by all of these things. But if we are going to have more stability, if you're going to have more mindfulness, if you're going to be able to react to the world in a more skillful way, you have to stand back a little bit, not to be so involved in everything. So there is like a gradual process here of overcoming craving, first of all by giving rise to mindfulness, and then gradually through the Eightfold Path, as we were talking about before, eventually seeing things as they actually are, and then eliminating craving completely. So anyway, so let's just, I can use this fancy tool, and I forgot about that already. So let's see what happens. Yay, okay. So when, then we have the Vedana Nirodha, Tanha Nirodho, from the cessation of sensation, from the cessation of sensation. Wow, it's hard to say.
There 5 times quickly.
That's what, exactly. There is the cessation of tanha, of craving, And so this is what you see here. So eventually we want to end sensation, and then craving comes to an end. And this may seem a bit strange. I was talking about before that what we really need to end is avidya, the ignorance at the beginning, and then craving ceases. And so these are like 2 different ways of thinking about it. Really, it is avidya that needs to be eliminated, but at the same time, if you eliminate sensation, also craving will come to a stop. So, and the idea, of course, if you eliminate avidya, then sensation will eventually end, and then craving will come to an end as well as a consequence. So let's see how this is done, how this actually happens. How craving comes to an end. And first of all, there is the gradual reduction of craving. And this is a very large part of what the Buddhist path is about. So if you keep the 5 precepts, if you try to live with kindness in your life, if you try to speak nicely to other people, and especially if you try to think in the right way with less ill will, less of negative thoughts, and more kindness and all these things, if you practice the path in this way, which is such an important part, which is fundamental for this path to really work out, one of the main things you are doing is actually reducing craving here. But one of the most important parts to do this, and I will show you in a second, is actually how we relate to the world and how we think about the world. This is so important, and I will show you in a second how to actually think about the world in such a way that craving gradually is reduced. So this is the first step. And as you reduce the craving becomes less and less and less. There comes a point when craving actually is eliminated completely here. Specifically, this is about the craving for the sensual objects of the world, the objects of the five senses. This is specifically what this is about. So as we reduce this, and this is one of the most difficult jobs, in a sense, for a Buddhist, is to actually eliminate that craving entirely, because we're so enmeshed in the world of the five senses. To get rid of that attachment completely and not have any craving, actually this is probably the most difficult part of the Buddhist path. Once you go beyond this, once you get to samadhi, to the jhanas or whatever, the path starts to become very relatively easy, because you have access to great amounts of bliss, you have understood the problems of these things, and then the insights tend to come fairly automatically based on that. This is really the kind of the nitty-gritty and the hard part of the path. So you eliminate it temporarily by going into a state of samadhi, of jhanas and all of these kind of things. And then once you have done that, then coming out of that samadhi, that is when you can make the final ending of craving here. And that is the same thing as eliminating ignorance at the very beginning of the path, of dependent origination, And that is equivalent to awakening here. So you can see the process here. The process is a gradual elimination of craving, then the gradual reduction of craving, then the temporary elimination of craving, and then the final abandoning of craving. And it has to be done in that sequence. There is no such thing as doing this in any other way. This is the only way it will work. And the Buddha actually points that out in a few places. You have to get things in the right order, otherwise it's not going to work out. This is an important point to doing it this way. So you can see here how we're kind of jumping a bit back and forth in dependent origination. We're not just working with sensation leading to craving, but we are reducing things there. That affects avidya at the very beginning, and then that affects craving again at the later point of these 12 factors. So that is the how we gradually come to this. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually overcome, how we deal, especially with the reduction in craving. Once you come to the temporary elimination of craving, you don't have much problems anymore, but how we deal with reducing craving in this particular juncture between Vedana and Tanha, between sensation and craving. And I'm going to show you, people often ask about the idea of sense restraint, for example, because this is exactly where sense restraint comes in, that we're able to hold back on our senses and to see how to deal with these things in a skillful way. And one of the things I want to point out, which is very interesting in the suttas, is that sense restraint actually means, mostly what it means using wisdom and using reflection for overcoming these kind of problems. When we translate as sense restraint in English, it sounds like there is a degree of willpower involved. I'm going to hold back. I'm going to stop myself from desiring too much and getting my mind out of control and all of these kind of things. But actually, it's not really, sometimes willpower is right, because sometimes things get out of control and reflection doesn't work or whatever. But generally speaking, the ideal way, and especially the long-term way of overcoming these things, is actually through reflection. And that reflection is very closely connected to right view. Yeah, it's one of those interesting things, and I'm not going to go on to the next slide because I want to I'll have a break in a minute. But it's one of those very interesting things about right view in Buddhism. Yeah, Samma Ditti. Normally, when we talk about right view, we think about there is such a thing as rebirth, yeah, Punnabhava Jati. You have the idea of Kamma, yeah, which is a very important part of the idea of right view in Buddhism. You have the idea of awakening, that awakening is possible, yeah. And these are some of the core aspects of right view. But really the way that and these are of course very, very fundamental, but I think there are more basic ideas of right view that are more effective in our daily life, yeah. And these other ideas of right view are really about our entire outlook, how we relate to the world, how we think about our life, what we value in this world, whether we value meditation practice, we value kindness, or whether we value accumulating things and money and power and social status and all of these kind of things. What is really valuable to us? And this is also about right view, yeah? This is also about thinking about things in the right way. And often it is more practical kind of right view, because it's something that we can do right here and right now. And that right view is very closely related with reflection. So you hear the Buddha talking about the world in a certain way. Yeah, he says, forget about those sensual, all the sensory objects of the world. They are impermanent, they are problematic, you can't control them, you're going to die anyway, so what's the point in kind of, accumulating too much of that? And as you reflect on that, yeah, those teachings, you think, yeah, the Buddha has a point. Yeah, there's really something to this. I really need to seek a refuge somewhere else. I need to redirect my attention. And this kind of right view has very important implications, because this is what enables you to meditate properly. It enables you to take away your interest from all of those worldly things that are so enticing very often. And it changes your entire way of thinking about life. So this is a very practical way of thinking about right view. And for this reason, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this to bring in a bit more of the practical aspects of dependent origination. Yeah, so far it's been quite theoretical, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that as such, but it's good to have a bit more of a good mix, I think. Yeah. So let's have a short break, and then we'll continue in 5 minutes or so. Okay, let us carry on. And so are there any questions or comments so far? Anyone like to say anything about what we have done here? Everything? Okay, everyone okay? So I'll just a couple of questions from outside the center. One of the questions we received was what is the connection between the Noble Eightfold Path and dependent origination? And actually this question was already answered by Venerable Sunyo, I think on the third Saturday or something like that, I can't remember now, where he pointed out that the Noble Eightfold Path is the thing that undermines avidya, ignorance. Ignorance is ultimately eliminated by the Noble Eightfold Path. So it fits in at the very beginning. It is the thing which eliminates the problem, the root cause of dependent origination. You may remember, I don't know if you remember, but I also gave this long series of links, which started with saying that avidya is caused by the ignorance, is caused by the 5 hindrances, which are then caused by the 3 kinds of wrong conduct, which are caused by lack of sense restraint, and then going back all the way to not seeing the noble ones. That's the root cause. And if that whole long sequence, if you look at it and you compare it to the Noble Eightfold Path, basically that is the same thing as the Noble Eightfold Path. It's an alternative exposition, if you like, of the Noble Eightfold Path. Everything in Buddhism is the same at the end of the day. It's all kind of one thing, one insight. So it all fits together very beautifully like that. And I also wanted maybe to just very briefly again talk about the connection between the 5 khandhas, the 5 aspects of personality, and dependent origination is a question that comes up a lot. And again, the idea is that dependent origination is the process of the 5 khandhas, and it shows how the 5 khandhas recreate themselves, how they self-perpetuate. The 5 khandhas creating the 5 khandhas in the future through rebirth. So there's the process of the 5 khandhas and how they recreate themselves in the future. That's one way of thinking about dependent origination. Okay, just let's have a quick look at these questions here. Okay, who in the community gets to decide when someone is enlightened? Okay, you come here and then Ajahn Brahm gives you a stamp on the forehead. Pick! Awakened. No, you don't get to... How can an enlightened or yet to be enlightened know the difference? The term has many doors, rabbit holes, and dialectical ironies. Okay, it is true. It is a very tricky, very, very tricky matter. And a lot of people who claim to be enlightened in the world, they are nowhere near enlightened. You go to certain websites and it says, enlightened so-and-so, arahant so-and-so. And straight away, this person is not an arahant. That's the only thing you know for certain if you have that on your have a website. And then you read down, enlightenment is okay, but, you still have to go to work, you still have to kind of hang out with your wife, so it's not such a big deal to be enlightened. And you think, oh. And this is a problem in the world. There are people, it's very easy to get deluded about these things, but from a Buddhist point of view, this is very, very profound. There's no way you would have any interest in even living in a house, let alone working or having a wife or a husband. You'd get rid of your husband and wife a long time ago if you became enlightened. It's completely uninteresting to you. All you want to do is really be a hermit. All you want to do is just to, enjoy the blisses of the mind. So what you have to do is you have to read the suttas very carefully. You have to know how the Buddha defined enlightenment and use that as your basis for deciding. And the way to decide is, have you got any defilements? Do you ever have even the slightest irritation? Do you have the slightest craving for the sensual objects of the world? Do you attain samadhi just when you like, just go into jhana, bang, just like that, one breath, actually 0 breath, just bing into samadhi? Sounds good. And have you got full confidence in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha? Are you a person who is always generous and virtuous and kind? Especially, is your heart completely open to people at all times? Have you got endless kinds of loving kindness? People who are always kind. They're kind of what you expect from an arahant. Do you know that rebirth has ended? This is one of the fundamental knowledges of the arahant. You know that rebirth has come to an end. This is pretty profound. You may wonder, how can you even know that? But that's the point. It is very profound. That is one of the knowledges you have as an arahant. So you use these kind of criteria, and then you can have some idea. Still, people overestimate themselves, but then at least there's some chance you will know what is right. In the end, only you can know. But you have to be really careful, because if you do overestimate yourself, if you do get it wrong, you're going to block your own path, and you will block access to awakening because you overestimate yourself. This is one of the things specifically said in the sutras. If you think you are awakened, but you're not, then basically you have blocked out the opportunity because you stop searching, stop trying to go even deeper here.
I've got a towel in the monastery that I use for taking a shower, and it has a label on it which says high quality product. And when I saw that label, I know this is not a high quality product, because you would never put a label high quality product on a high quality product. And I thought, it's like somebody saying, I'm an arahant. I'm high quality, they're not.
Good point. But what if it says low quality product? Then it's more believable. It's more kind of. So maybe we can put non-arahant, and then one day we take it off. We take the label off one day, and then people think, "Oh, what's going on?" But that's actually why we should really never. If someone asks you, you should never really answer one way or the other, because one day you start to become silent. Initially you say, "Oh, I'm nothing. I'm not an arahant." Ajahn Brahm actually told me this originally. You should never say either way, because there is kind of a either way there can be an implication. Anyway, so. Anyway, next one. Paul Tan, is there an age limit to ordination? There is an age limit to become a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. So to become a bhikkhu, you have to be, how old do you have to be? 18? It says 20 in the Vinaya, but 20 from what point? This is kind of interesting. So maybe it's actually more like 19 and a half, because according to the Vinaya, it's 20 from the moment that your consciousness becomes established in this life, in your mother's womb. That's kind of when it begins, so it's kind of hard to decide. So 19 and a half is usually okay. But for the nuns, it's interesting. It's more complicated for the nuns. And for the nuns, sometimes if you have been married, or something like that, you can actually become a bhikkhuni at age 12, according to the Vinaya. So I don't know if that's a good idea. Have you got any 12-year-olds in the bhikkhunis? No. It's a bit, I think in the modern age, it's probably good to have, I would probably recommend 20 for both genders myself, actually, but it's up to the bhikkhunis to decide on those questions for themselves. So if you want to comment on this later, please feel free to do so. But you can become a novice in the monastery, as soon as you are able to scare a crow. So are you able to scare a crow, Paul? If you are, I don't know how old you are, if you are 12 maybe? You probably wouldn't be here if you're 12 years older, but if you can scare a crow, it says in the Vinaya, then you're allowed to be ordained as a novice monk. But generally speaking, these days we don't really take novices that age in the monastery. Not that there are heaps of them knocking on the door anyway, so it's okay. But usually we don't do that. Okay, from Bill, how much of our craving is just human nature? Human nature is very malleable and very subject to how we live our lives and how we think about the world and what kind of insights we have, what kind of meditation we have. So craving is not actually a fundamental aspect of human nature at all. It's possible to be a human being without any craving. And this is what awakening is all about. Eliminating craving, but not still being a human being. Of course, an ordinary human being, yes, you have to be craving by definition, because that's kind of what it means to be an ordinary human being. But if you are awakened, then craving can be completely eliminated. There is a slight distinction there between desire and craving. Yeah? There is still some desire, even for the awakened being. And the reason there is desire, because desire or wanting is really a neutral term. That means that it gets you moving. Yeah? If you didn't have any kind of desire, you wouldn't be doing anything. Yeah? To get out of bed in the morning, you have to have the desire to get out of bed. To go to the loo, you have to have the desire to go to the loo. Yeah? Otherwise, you'd be really filthy after a while. If you didn't have the desire to eat anything, you wouldn't be eating anything. So there is something which drives even the arahants, and that is a very basic kind of desire. And that's why I think the distinction between craving and desire is quite useful, because craving is like a strong kind of desire. It is what tends to animate us as ordinary, or drive us as ordinary people. Whereas the desire, the arahant, is a very weak kind of desire that is only functional. It makes you function, but it doesn't really have any purpose to create happiness in the future or create renewed existence or anything like that. From William, if craving is the 8th link of dependent origination, is it the 8th link? 1, 2, 3, 4, you're probably right, yeah? Why is it mentioned in the second noble truth instead of ignorance? Well, this is what we were talking about at the very beginning, is that the dependent origination is an alternative way of thinking about the second noble truth. Yeah? It is an expansion of the second noble truth. So the second noble truth focuses on the thing that drives rebirth. And the thing that drives rebirth is craving. Yeah? Because why? Because craving projects you into the future. Craving is always about a desired future state. I want to be in this way. I want to experience these things. It's always looking to something else. But craving is not all that useful when it comes to deciding how we're going to eliminate rebirth. And the reason why it is not that useful is because you cannot eliminate craving merely by restraint, by holding back, by being wise. Craving has to be eliminated by eliminating ignorance at the very beginning and giving rise to understanding and knowledge instead. And that's why I think the Buddha brings it back to avidya, because it shows the root problem, the thing that we really can deal with. And if you think about the Noble Eightfold Path and how that fits into this, yeah, the purpose of the Noble Eightfold Path is to give rise to insight, yeah, and that insight is what overturns avidya at the very beginning. And when that avidya is overturned, then craving itself stops. So this is how this kind of fits together. Anyway, let's put that to one side for now. Would you like to add anything, Venerable Sunyo?
I agree with that.
You happy? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So let's come back to craving again and how to eliminate craving. And I'm going to talk about a couple of suttas fairly briefly, because we haven't got that much time this morning, that I often teach when I teach meditation retreats, yeah, because this has very much to do with the development of the mind, specifically how to overcome craving. And this first sutta here is called the Two Powers Sutta. And there is a number of suttas that have this name, and they are found in the numerical discourses, and the Anguttara Nikaya, in the twos, and it is the 11, 12, 13, and 14. So I think about 4 suttas in the row, which are called the Two Powers. Yeah, Bala in Pali. Bala is a power. And this is 2 powers. Yeah, so power is something which has the effect of driving the spiritual path. Power is something powerful, yeah, by definition. So these are the things that kind of drive the spiritual path. Yeah, so obviously very fundamental to our ability to practice a spiritual path properly. And here the Buddha brings it down to 2 specific powers. Yeah, this is kind of the getting down to really the basics of what the path is about, if you like. So what are these 2 powers? Yeah, kind of interesting. I'm going to talk about the second power first, then come back to the first one. So 2 powers. The power of reflection. This is the first one. I'll just show them to you first of all, and come back to the second one. So this is the first power, the power of reflection, Pati Sankhana Bala. yeah? And it's kind of interesting, yeah? Reflection is considered a power in Buddhism. Why is reflection a power? And this is kind of why I'm bringing this up. And again, this has to do with what I mentioned before about the importance of right view on the Buddhist path, the idea of what we value in the world, the idea of how we change a mind which is defiled to a more pure mind, how we change our habits from being bad to good. All of that has to do with how we reflect this right view, thinking about the world in the right way, valuing the right things. That happens through reflection. And it is something that you see in so many places of the sutras, where the Buddha talks about listening to the Dhamma, giving ear when the Buddha is teaching, and then gradually reflecting on those teachings. And as you do that, thinking about how they apply in your life. How do I use this? What does it mean for me? How am I supposed to have this view now in relation to all the things of the world that I always have to deal with? Yeah, it's very interesting, because it really should come down to us. How do I relate to my world, my experiences? This is where this comes in. And as you do that, you gain what the Buddha says is a reflective acceptance of that view, of that teaching of the Buddha. You start to understand, this makes good sense. And you start to incorporate it into your own life. You incorporate it into your meditation practice. When you sit down in meditation and you see your mind going astray, straight away, these reflections drive you back on the track again. Instead of suppressing those thoughts which lead in the wrong place, instead of suppressing thoughts that have to do with ill will or with desires, all kinds, actually you'd use the reflection to straight away put it back on track again, because you understand you're heading towards dukkha instead of suffering, instead of heading towards happiness. So this is remarkably powerful. I'll show you in a second how this works even more. Then the second power is one that is more familiar. This is called the power of development. This is the bhavana bala. Bhavana is perhaps the word we can translate as meditation. It is used in certain countries. I believe in Sri Lanka, bhavana is a word that is often used for meditation practice. So it is a very important, in this way and in this sutta, it is used exactly like that. It is used about meditation. Sometimes it's used more broadly to use the development of the entire path, but here the focus is on meditation practice specifically. So here we go, the power of development. What does it mean? It's when a mendicant, develops the awakening factor of mindfulness, the awakening factor of investigation of principles, or investigation of dhammas, and of principles is okay, I think, in this context. Awakening factor of energy, the awakening factor of rapture or joy, the awakening factor of tranquility, the awakening factor of immersion, the awakening factor of equanimity. Immersion is just Bhante Sujato's translation for samadhi, for stillness. I should have put stillness in there, but I missed that for some reason. I was going too fast as usual. So, we make up these slides fairly quickly, just a couple of days before, so we sometimes just kind of rush through it a bit. But stillness would have been, I think, better there, at least from my point of view. But immersion has its own advantages. Anyway, that's beside the point. So these are the 7 factors of awakening. Some of you may recognize those straight away. What are the 7 factors of awakening about? It's all about meditation practice. The first awakening factor is the one of mindfulness. It's equivalent to the satipatthanas, to mindfulness meditation, which is equivalent to the breath meditation. All of these things are the same. And then it goes all the way to the last one, which is equanimity, upekkha. 7 factors of awakening. And the last one is the most profound aspect of samadhi on the path, equivalent roughly to the 4th jhana. So this is the entire practice from the moment you start doing mindfulness meditation all the way to the highest kind of samadhi. That is what the 7 awakening factors are about. So it is about meditation. It's about the development of the mind. So what happens before that? How do we get to the point that we are ready to do meditation practice? I'm most of you here will have done some meditation practice in your life, and you will probably have noticed that sometimes the meditation is nice, other times it's terrible. Yeah, some of you may be always terrible. I don't know. Yeah, it really depends on the situation. Is anyone here who has always good? That is less likely that someone is always has good meditation, but that someone has always bad meditation, not so unlikely. Yeah, and and the reason is because our mind is inclining in the wrong direction. Yeah, so all the things that come before meditation practice, all the things that enable us to stay with the breath in breath meditation, is the other power that we come to now. Yeah, so everything that leads up to meditation, that enables us to do breath meditation. Yeah, if your meditation doesn't work, it means you haven't done enough of this other power. If you're not able to stay with the breath steadily, it means you need to do more of this other power before you can do the breath meditation. So very important, yeah, to bring us up to speed with meditation, to enable meditation to even work out for us. And of course, this power is the power of reflection. And this is how it is defined in this particular sutta. It is when someone reflects bad conduct by body, speech, or mind, has bad, painful results in both this life and the next life. Reflecting like this, they give up bad conduct by body, speech, and mind, and they develop good conduct by body, speech, and mind, keeping themselves in purity. So that is the power of reflection here. Now, so if you want to give up your bad conduct, the best way to do that is to think in the right way. Yeah, it is not really about kind of forcing yourself too much or gritting your teeth and saying, from now on I'm going to be nice all the time. You know, often it doesn't work. If you force yourself too much, it leads to exasperation, and you can't force yourself anyway because your habits are so strong. They kind of come through that willpower. You're not really able to hold it down at all times. So because of that, it just leads to problems after a while. But the most important thing here is that it's not just the speech and body, but mind as well. Overcoming the bad conduct of mind and developing the good conduct of mind comes through reflection. It does not come through meditation practice. Why? Well, because when you come to meditation practice, you should really have overcome the majority of that bad conduct already. Because if your mind is full of bad conduct, it sounds kind of strange to say that mind is full of bad conduct, but this is the way the Buddha talks about this. If you have that bad aspects in the mind, you won't be able to meditate. You can't meditate. Why? Because your mind is going to be so distracted. You're going to think negative thoughts there. You're going to desire this. You're going to think about work and problems and family life and what entertainments you're going to do and all of these kind of things. And on it goes. Papancha. If you remember the word papancha from last time, it's a beautiful word. Endless proliferation. Because that realm of those things just goes on forever and ever and ever. So you can't meditate. So to purify the mind does not happen so much through meditation practice. Meditation can be a little bit helpful if you use it in the right way, but it happens essentially through reflecting in the right way, knowing how to use your mind so as to overcome these problems. So it's interesting, isn't it? And this is not something that you will hear all that often. The Buddha teaches in this way, but it's not a very common way of hearing about this. So I think it is very fundamental to how to understand the Buddhist path, how to deal with the mind and all of these kind of things. So this is my first point, the two powers. So having established that, the question then is, how do we do this in practice? This is the next thing I want to talk about. Let's have a short break before I move on to the next one. Okay, let's carry on again. Yeah. Okay, is there any questions? Prem, please fire away.
Ajahn, I don't remember the word addiction used so far.
Addiction.
Addiction.
Yeah.
I suppose the subject that we are discussing right now is a way to reduce or stop addiction as well, isn't it? Is it habit and addiction? I suppose it's a byproduct of what we are discussing, the
Well,
connection between sensation and craving.
Well, yeah, I guess addiction is just like a very strong craving, really, you know, really powerful craving, and a kind of craving that you can't really let go very easily. But we are all addicted to some extent, you know.
I'm talking about unwholesome.
Sorry?
Unwholesome addictions.
Unwholesome addictions, yeah, but you know, even from a Buddhist point of view, ultimately, all addictions are really unwholesome. Ultimately, it just depends on the degree of unwholesomeness, I suppose. But some are really, as you say, much more unwholesome than others. Like drug addictions, for example, are obviously going to be very unwholesome because they lead to very serious problems. Whereas being addicted to, you know, a nice breakfast is not such a big deal. So, yeah, you're right. So this is part of this as well. So you could, you know, so in a sense, you know, the answer is here. But I think with addictions, real addictions, you need more than just the Dhamma to help you out. You need more specific, you know, support from a psychologist or whatever who can kind of move you away from that. I mean, the principle used will be in line with the Dhamma, but the Dhamma doesn't really focus on kind of special cases like that so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah. Venerable, yeah, please.
Ajahn, so reflection.
Yeah.
So when you're reflecting to look at habitual patterns of behavior, our way of thinking, acting. This is not easy to do. It's like flowing off the water and making it go in the opposite direction.
Yeah. It's hard.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But it's worth it. Yeah.
It's definitely worth it. So,
Yeah.
Ajahn, I may perhaps throughout the course some practical.
It's coming now in a second. Yeah, but you're right. Though I really agree with what you say. It is precisely because they are habitual, these bad habits, that they are very hard to overcome. Yeah, these are really deeply rooted things, very habitual, and that is hard to overcome. But the point is, it can be overcome, and the way to do it is just to apply these things again and again and again, and then gradually, it's like turning a supertanker, super heavy. Yeah, that's why it's called supertanker, really heavy. And if you want to turn it around, it has a lot of momentum. It takes several kilometers before you can start turning the supertanker. And our minds are like supertankers of bad habits, filled with bad habits. Yeah, not good habits too. Yeah, a mixture of things. But it's the bad habits you want to overcome. It takes a long time to kind of change that momentum and move it in a different direction. So yeah, absolutely. Ananda. Yeah.
Thanks, Ajahn. Ajahn, with the two reflection sutta, you also teach Sangvara Sutta about the Indriya Sangvara. Yeah. And also, I think you have taught us that Indriya Bhavana, which is the last one in the Majjhima Nikaya, MN 152. And what is the basic, one is Indriya Sangvara, other one is Indriya Bhavana. Yeah. What is the significant difference between these two aspects of achieving this power of reflection through those, what is taught in those two suttas?
It's essentially the same thing. Yeah.
Essentially the same thing.
Yeah, it's just that the point is, and I think this is what people often don't this is why it's so hard to understand, because when you read sense restraint, which I think is an acceptable translation, but when you read that, you think willpower straight away. Restraint means holding something back by force usually, You restrain a person, you put them in a straitjacket even, So it's really kind of strong restraint. But really, actually, the way the Buddha talks about it, very often it talks about it using wisdom and using reflection instead. So I don't think there is any difference. They illuminate each other and they show each other what they actually are. So when we talk about restraint of the eye faculty, for example, this is the sort of thing we're talking about in large part anyway,
So it is that MN 152 is mainly about the power of reflection on through wisdom. Is that what you say?
MN 152 is about more than that, because it is about the various stages above and now. There's higher stages and lower stages, but one of the stages is about that, but only one of them, Yeah. Okay, Venerable?
Yeah, I think the mic might not be, so I'll just project a little louder. I think it's similar to that question, but I wasn't quite sure what you meant, or if you could please explain further your comment that purification of mind actually happens mainly through reflection and not meditation. Because when we look at the power of development, the slide was on the 7 factors of enlightenment, and wouldn't like Dhammavijaya knowing include being able to distinguish between unwholesome and wholesome states, and the virya to prevent and abandon unwholesome states and develop the good ones? It sounds like that is also a process of purification. So wondering if you could explain further the difference, or what you meant by that comment.
Yeah, what I meant is that the purifying up to a certain level, not completely, but up to a certain level, that enables meditation to work. Once, because if you try to get to the meditation object too early, as I said, your mind is going to be too distracted by the defilements. It's not going to work. So you eliminate it to that point that enables meditation to happen, and then the last purification, the upakilesa, this is the small, tiny defilements, they are purified through meditation practice. So it's a different levels of purification. So what I really meant, maybe I should have been more clear about that, is kind of the coarser defilements of the mind.
Shall I do a few, Ajahn?
Go for it,
Give me a little break.
Yeah.
I remember Ajahn Brahm translated Vedana as experience. Can you discuss?
I'm glad you're doing this one.
Well, the thing with translations is translators use different translations, not so much because one would be better than the other, but because they want to illuminate the Dhamma or the underlying Pali words from a different angle. And Ajahn Brahm uses experience for Vedana. The usual translation is feeling, and we use sensation, so they all sort of come down to the same thing. Problem with feeling that we find, and probably Ajahn Brahm also finds, is it sounds more like emotion, but Vedana is more like the quality of experience. So experience is all right.
Is it?
It says, can you kindly discuss?
Kindly, okay.
That's what it
you looked at the
says,
kind, okay. Okay.
Are likes and dislikes a form of craving? Not necessarily. Likes and dislikes, they can lead to craving. You may like certain food, and I don't know what you like, and then if you like that food, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to craving. It's only when those likes sort of overpower you, when they become more important than the calm of mind, then that's when craving arises. Same with dislikes. You may have some things you don't really like, I don't know, walking outside in the rain. Some people don't like, but sometimes you have to go out in the rain. If you get really angry, I have to walk in the rain. Well, that's like a sort of negative craving, right? Your mind is taken over by your dislikes. But sometimes you can just dislike it, but not really be influenced by it at all. That's what I would say. So they're not a form of craving. I wonder at what point exactly is new karma created? think that's thinking a bit too technical about karma, I think. You don't go about living your life thinking, oh, am I creating karma at this point? That's not how I would go about things. Just look at your mind and see, as it says here, on the slide, you reflect about bad conduct. Bad conduct is like bad karma of body, speech, and mind. This is the sankhara, actually, of the dependent origination. And so you reflect, am I doing bad conduct, and where does it lead to? And you don't ask yourself when exactly you're doing these things, I would say.
Yeah, but I guess you could, if you want to give a technical answer, you could say that whenever you have an intention, which is pretty much all the time, you're making karma of some sort. It's kind of, but obviously the karma is more powerful if the intention is really good or really bad. That's what the ones you should focus on. Yeah.
Is there any difference in physical practice, reflection, and meditation? Is there any difference in physical practice, reflection, and meditation? Well, this is maybe a thing to point out, that question before about reflection coming before meditation, but sometimes they sort of overlap in a sense, because in your meditation you can also reflect about things, right? Meditation doesn't always have to be about focusing on the breath or doing kindness. There's also meditation when you really reflect on Dhamma a bit more on the level of feeling. On the previous slide it has the 7 awakening factors, and it starts with mindfulness, with sati, and that also means remembering. Sati means remembering or recollecting. So you can recollect the Dhamma or the qualities of the Buddha or something like that. That is more like a reflection. So they overlap in some extent. So there is a difference, but I'm not 100% sure whether question whether that answers your question, but
maybe the question means whether physical practice means like when you live your ordinary life. But that's what the question is about. That
by physical practice, I thought like
I'm not sure.
The kind of thing like I don't know, push-ups and whatever.
So, yes. But the answer to that is that if that's what you mean, then reflection should be used all the time. Whether can be used during meditation, but this is not just about meditation. It's also about how you live your life in general. When you're around people, your family, at work, and all these kind of things. Then these reflections are there to inform how you deal with those situations. If you feel yourself getting upset with a colleague at work or one of your family members, then straight away these reflections kick in to enable you to overcome that negative thought or that ill will or whatever it is. So these are things that should be used all the time, and that's why they have the ability to purify your conduct and also your mental, the way you think about things.
And by the way, on the previous slide, the second factor, Dhammavicca, like investigation, that's almost the same as reflection in a sense.
It is, but I think at that point it's more refined usually, but it's the same idea, Okay, let's carry on. And now I want to have a look at another sutta, one of my favorite suttas in the middle-length sayings of the Buddha, number 19, called Two Kinds of Thought, Dveda Vitakka Sutta in Pali. And it is a sutta about how to divide your thinking into two parts. And one of the nice things about this sutta, as you will see, is this is about the Buddha himself and how he practiced before his awakening. So this is the Buddha speaking here. Mendicants, before my awakening, I thought. So in other words, here the Buddha is saying what he did to reach awakening. And this is, I just comment on this very briefly, but to me this is very, even though this is a bit beside the dependent origination course, it is interesting how the Buddha uses his own life and his own experiences to inspire us to practice in the same way that he did. Sometimes we put the Buddha on the wrong kind of pedestal, and we think that the Buddha is completely different from us. And of course, if he is completely different from us, then his life has no relation to ours, and what he did is irrelevant as far as we are concerned. But that's not how it comes out in the suttas. In the suttas, the Buddha seems to be saying, well, I am a human being. Yeah, I did this, even though the Buddha obviously had tremendous wisdom to be able to break through on his own. That is what makes the Buddha so special, that he did it without a teacher. But the basic ideas, the basic way of practice are the same for a Buddha as it is for the rest of us. So when the Buddha gave these beautiful autobiographical suttas, and you see quite a few of them, it's actually really worthwhile listening to those as well and see if we can practice in the way that the Buddha himself did. So this is why the Buddha says this, to inspire us to do the same thing. Yeah. So before my awakening, I thought, why don't I divide my thoughts into two kinds? Yeah, two kinds of thoughts. And it is no surprise to know that these two different kinds of thoughts are, on the one side, the unwholesome, the unhealthy, the bad kind of thoughts, and on the other side, the good thoughts, the positive ones, the ones that actually are useful for the path. So then on one side, I put sensual thoughts, angry thoughts, and ruthless thoughts. Yeah, these are the three kinds of unwholesome thoughts that you find in the suttas. Sensual thoughts mean any thoughts that have to do with the sensory world. Yeah, it doesn't just mean kind of core sensual thoughts. It doesn't just mean thinking about sex or anything like that. It is a very broad kind of idea of attachment and interest in the sensory world. Yeah, that's really what it is about. So an interest in whatever is happening in that world are sensory thoughts. That's why I think sensual is a bit misleading, because it tends to kind of drive the discussion into one particular direction. But if you think sensory experience, then it's more broad. Angry thoughts, any kind of anger, any kind of ill will that we might have in our lives. And the last one, the ruthless thoughts, these are thoughts that are lacking in compassion. Yeah, thoughts that have to do with where you don't have any consideration for for other people, whether they are happy or not. You couldn't care less whether other people suffer or not. Yeah, I've got to get this business deal sorted out, and if it's gonna, lots of people get hurt as a consequence, I don't care. It is not ill will. It is just a coldness of heart. Yeah, you don't care. You don't consider other people's feelings. It's the opposite of being compassionate, basically. Yeah, ruth means compassion. So ruthless means devoid of compassion. So these are the bad thinking, three kinds of bad thinking. And then you have the other side, and the other side are the thoughts of non-sensual thoughts, so these are things like, I would call it here, giving up of that sensory world. Thoughts of non-anger, so the opposite of being angry, and then thoughts of compassion is the last one. So you divide the world into these two categories. This is the first one, the Buddha thinks. Why don't I divide my thoughts in this way? In other words, first of all, you need to understand that there is a problem here. You need to understand that these things actually are problematic. Most people don't even think like that. You go through your life, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're not, and you don't really think that these things are really problematic. I should really do something about it. And certainly not the sensory thoughts or sensual thoughts. Very few people think about that as really problematic. Usually we kind of indulge and we enjoy that sensory world, and we think it is perfectly acceptable to think about that. So even this is quite radical, this idea of dividing the world up into this way. It takes some kind of spiritual mastermind to be able to do this. It sounds so obvious when you think about it, but the reason it sounds obvious to us is because we are Buddhist already. We have been taught these things, but it is not really all that obvious. And then the Buddha says, as I practiced in this way, careful, diligent, and resolute. Again, it's an interesting statement, because what the Buddha is saying here is that the very act of dividing the world into two kinds of thoughts, that is a practice which is careful, diligent, and resolute. Yeah, the idea, just that simple thing of understanding the world in that way is actually sufficient to call it a diligent, resolute, and careful practice. So sometimes we misunderstand what diligence means on the Buddhist path. Again, it's a matter of reflecting in the right way, of of understanding what is unwholesome, understanding what is wholesome, and dividing these things in the right way. That is often what is meant by carefulness, by diligence, by heedfulness, all of these things in practice, being circumspect, etc. So this is the first part. And then what happens? Yeah, as you are practicing in this way, as you understand this distinction, then an angry thought arose in me, says the Buddha. Yeah, so he has some kind of ill will. Yeah. This doesn't mean that the Buddha necessarily got very angry. I don't think that he's that kind of person who gets very angry, but you can see the root, yeah, the kind of the basic seed of ill will is still there, and that's still kind of hasn't been completely eliminated. So some thought of that arises in the Buddha. Yeah, so a thought of ill will arises. So what does the Buddha do when a thought of ill will arises? He does, I understood thus. This thought of ill will, or this angry thought, has arisen in me. So this is the first thing here. To actually know the distinction in yourself between defiled thoughts and thoughts that are pure. And I don't know what you think, whether that's easy or not, but this actually is a very difficult thing to do. Of course, it is very easy on a superficial level, because we all know that when you get really angry, of course, it is unwholesome. Or if you have a very powerful desire for something, you also can feel that it's unwholesome because it's leading you by the nose, leading you to do crazy things. But these come in very refined aspects. Yeah? There are very refined aspects of these kind of thinking. Especially later on when I come over to the sensual thoughts, these can be extraordinarily refined. Small attachments, like attachment to your body, for example, yeah? The things that stop you from making progress in meditation. Attachment to anything really in the sensory world is a kind of sensual thought, and that is what ultimately blocks our meditation practice. So this, even having this understanding, actually takes a lot of insight. It takes a long time before we're able to gain that fully. And really the way to gain it fully is first of all through eliminate it in our ordinary life, and then do the final investigation through meditation and do the final elimination at that particular point. There's a gradual sequence to this. Yeah, so you have to keep on investigating. And especially as you find that your path is progressing, as you're able to eliminate some of these problems, you can see them gradually falling away. And what you find, and this is kind of despairing sometimes, you find new defilements coming up underneath. Yeah, they may not be as coarse as the previous ones, but there's more there. And then you eliminate those, there's even more, yeah, refined stuff. And you kind of uncover these things in your mind as your mind becomes more peaceful and as you are developing this path, understanding more and more deeply what is going on now. So you understand this, yeah? And then you understand, once you understand this, you understand this leads to my own suffering. Yeah. So this is how the Buddha deals with defilements. Yeah, the understanding straight away that this leads to my own suffering. And later on, when you come down, when we come to the bottom here, the Buddha says, because I understand this, I let it go. I abandon it. Yeah, this is how you abandon it. So what this means is that the way to abandon the anger is through an act of reflection. You reflect that this leads to my own suffering. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you just think, oh yeah, this leads to my own suffering. That's not enough. It means that you know in a deep way that this actually does lead to your own suffering. Yeah. You have reflected on this again and again, a number of times. You think, yeah, what happens when I'm angry? Actually, I do stupid things. Yeah, I destroy my relationships with people around me. I create bad karma for myself. Yeah, and then I create a habit which then comes back again and again, like Venerable Bhajenti was saying before. And then this carries on and on like this in the future. Yeah, you see, you know, and then after I have had some ill will, I feel really tired afterwards. I deplete the energy of my mind. Yeah, you can see very clearly how this anger actually leads to your own suffering. It is very obvious when you think about it. And then you start to become a little bit afraid of your own anger. You become a bit fearful. And if you understand it deeply enough, that anger and ill will leads to suffering, then your mind just turns away. It has no interest in ill will at all anymore. It turns away from that. The problem with ill will is that we tend to be interested in it. It gives us a sense of power. It gives us a sense of feeling that we are in charge. We're going to tell somebody off. We're going to make people change and make people think differently. But usually ill will is not the answer to make people think differently. It usually makes things worse. Kindness is usually the answer. So you turn away from ill will because you see it is absolutely counterproductive. It leads away from your own suffering. And if you have reflected on that deeply enough, then your mind just turns away automatically, like you are touching a hot plate, and it's super hot. And like I like to say, you don't have to think, should I remove my hand? Put your hand on by accident there. You don't have to think, oh, it's really hot, should I remove it? By that point, it's already too late. You already burnt yourself. So it's just bang, it's an automatic reaction. You just withdraw your hand. You don't have to reflect. In the same way, once you understand that anger is a problem, as soon as it arises, it's like you turn away from that because you know this is a dangerous thing to do. That is the power of reflection. It turns you away from things if you have really fully understood what they are about. Of course, you may think that this sounds like utopia, how are we going to do this? But it's a gradual thing. You start off by reflecting on it. Anger has less and less power over your mind until one day, as you do this properly, eventually you come to the point where your mind just turns away from these things. It leads to other people's suffering. If you want to be a compassionate person who helps others, there's nothing like anger to kind of cause suffering in the world. I think a lot of the problems in the world come from anger and ill will and revenge and all of this kind of crazy stuff. And we create so much suffering for each other through ill will and anger. It's kind of obvious again. So if you really like to be compassionate, if you really want to be kind to others, the only way is to turn away from the ill will and anger. It leads to the suffering of both. It is not as if you can sacrifice yourself and be compassionate to others. It's not as if you can sacrifice others and just be kind to yourself. Actually, both parties suffer when you're angry. You suffer and the other people suffer. Again, it's plenty enough to turn you away from this. It obstructs wisdom. Another powerful way of thinking about this. It obstructs wisdom. In other words, every time you're angry, you become foolish. Is that right? You know the feeling, when you're angry, you are kind of deluded about things. You're foolish about life. You don't really understand what needs to be done. And you become blind. You become biased. And then you don't know what you're doing. So if you want to be wiser, you have to have that evenness and balance of the mind where you don't become angry, nor do you have too much desires and things. It causes difficulties. And it leads away from extinguishment. Extinguishment here is a translation of nibbana. It leads away from nibbana. That's bad news. If you think nibbana is good news, it's bad news if it leads away from extinguishment. So this is how you reflect. And as you do that, you learn to redirect your mind in a new direction. And you learn to think about things in a different way. You remind yourself that people in the world, they are, to a large part, they're just following their habits. They are a bit like robots. They are trapped in their program, their personal program, which they have been kind of laid down through many lifetimes or whatever. And they are trapped in that. And very often they're not able to change. It is, in a sense, it's kind of sad. I think most of us, we realize that kindness leads to happiness. But even though we realize inside that kindness leads to happiness, we're not always able to live like that. Often we live contrary to what is to our own benefit. We do things that actually lead to our own suffering, even though we know that we should be kind. We're not able to do it. Why? Because the habits inside of us are so strong. So when you remember that, instead of getting angry with other people when they do stupid things, you actually have compassion for them. You realize someone is trapped in their own stupid habits. They can't be any different. Right now, you have to bear the brunt of the other person's stupidity and foolishness. Okay, you can deal with that, yeah? Why? Because you understand. They don't really mean it. They don't really want to be like that. It's just that they don't really have any option. They don't have any way out of it. This is the kind of way of thinking. And as you do that, gradually, you overcome these feelings. So that is the anger side of things. Before I go on to the next one, let's have a very, very brief meditation break just to digest things a little bit. Carry on again. I'm just going to continue for now because, and then see how things go. So that is the consideration of ill will, yeah, how to deal with the ill will and the anger. And I want to also very quickly have a look at how to deal with the, actually, yeah, then the Buddha, before I do that, then the Buddha says, when I considered thus, it subsided in me. Yeah, so it kind of left the Buddha when it thought in this way. So in other words, if you take these way of reflecting and you take them seriously and practicing them fully, then the ill will be abandoned as a consequence. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Or maybe he says here subsided. abandoned, or if not abandoned, at the very least, it will decline greatly, and that is the important part. Maybe there will be a tiny bit left that you kind of abandon in the actual meditation process. And then he says, whenever an angry thought arose in me, I abandoned it, removed it, did away with it. Yeah, quite strong words, removing it, doing away with it. But remember, the removing and the doing away, the way it is done here is by an act of reflection, an act of wisdom, a way of using your mind in a wise way. Yeah? Wisdom power, as Ajahn Brahm likes to say, not willpower. And this really comes out in the sutta, that wisdom power is what the Buddha was using when he abandoned these things. So very fascinating in a sense. So this is how craving then gradually comes down. Yeah, you can see you are gradually changing the relationship between Vedana and Tanha, sensation and craving in this way. So now let us look at the other side of this. This is when you have a sensual thought or a thought related to sensory desire. So as I practiced thus, careful, diligent, and resolute, a sensual thought arose in me. I understood thus, the sensual thought has arisen in me. Yeah, so again, it takes a lot of understanding to really fully grasp that, but gradually you uncover these things and then they become clear. It leads to my own suffering. Yeah, and this is very interesting because this is not very easy to see why a sensual thought should lead to your own suffering. And sometimes it can be quite hard to see because we enjoy the sensory world. Yeah, we enjoy the beautiful entertainment, the nice food. What's wrong with a bit of nice food? Yeah, what is wrong with all of these kind of things? But remember that when we talk about the sensory world, we're talking about something very broad. We're talking about our attachment to everything out there, everything we see, everything we hear, everything we experience in that world. And that entire realm is what is problematic. And sometimes rather than focusing on individual things like, am I attached to my food or not, it's not such a big deal. Yeah, don't worry if you enjoy your food. I enjoy my food. Ajahn Brahm tells me he enjoys his food as well. Yeah, if Ajahn Brahm enjoys food, you too are allowed to enjoy your food. Yeah, good news. So please enjoy your food. Otherwise, we make life really miserable. Yeah, it can become this really dry Buddhists. Yeah, who wither away because we have no joy and no happiness in life. So instead of thinking about individual things like that, think instead over the overall idea of that sensory world being problematic. How does it lead to your own suffering? And there are many ways of thinking about this. And one of the, in the suttas you have this idea, a few similes. Some of those similes are really, really powerful. And one of the similes that the Buddha uses, which is kind of interesting, is a simile of the grass torch. And he says enjoying or being attached to that world of sensory objects or sensory pleasures is like picking up a grass torch. Yeah, grass torch is useful because it gives light. You can see what you're doing. But if you take that grass torch and then you go against the wind, what happens? The embers come back at you because that's grass, kind of things blow off, and before you know it, you're alight. Yeah, you're burning. And that's the problem with a grass torch. So if you pick up a grass torch, you have to be very careful what you are doing. Ideally, probably you shouldn't pick it up at all. And sensual pleasures, things of the world, are a bit like that. And the reason they are like that is because they are unreliable, they are uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen with them. Before you know it, that attachment that you have to those things is going to be challenged by the impermanence and the unreliability of that world. And one of the ways of doing this, and I don't know what happens, but sometimes when I meditate, for example, and sometimes, I start thinking about things I should be doing or things that, that have happened or whatever. And sometimes all I need to do to turn me off that world is to remind myself that, these problems that I'm trying to resolve, they are endless. Yeah, you resolve one problem, there's another one, and then there's another one after that, and then you die. Then there's another problem when you get reborn again. Yeah. And then you die again. There's more problems after you get reborn again. And it goes on. There's an infinite horizons of problems that you have to solve. And that actually is very off-putting, yeah, because you know there's no end to it. So why do I think now that if I resolve this problem, it's going to be okay? It won't be okay. There's going to be more. And then it becomes so off-putting, you turn away from that. Or sometimes, you know, you think maybe you have had a discussion with somebody, you talk to somebody, and you very often when we talk to each other, even with the best of intentions, there are misunderstandings, yeah, because we look at the world in a different way. You are kind to somebody, but they react funnily. They react even maybe in a negative way, even though you feel that you have been kind to them. They kind of react badly, yeah. And then you realize that it is always going to be like that. Communication is always going to be imperfect. There's always going to be problems regardless of how kind you are. Not only that, but we're not always able to be kind. Sometimes we do say the wrong things. And then you think about that, and you think about some kind of maybe unfortunate encounter you had, and then you see those encounters happening again and again and again in the future. And instead of trying to resolve those bad encounters, you become so fed up with this whole thing called communication and dealing with people, sorting things out, that you turn away from that world again because it is so unpleasant and so difficult to deal with. You understand the negative aspects of that entire sensual realm, and you turn away from that. These are simple little techniques, yeah, seeing how the sensory world is so untenable. But be careful, yeah, if you do this too much, you might get really depressed. Yeah. Why? Because sometimes that is all we have. Yeah, we have the sensory happiness in the world. So make sure that as you reflect in this way, you also build up an alternative refuge inside of you. You find instead the happiness within, yeah, the peace within, and then when you have that refuge within, then it is possible to give up the external world in this way. So when you do these things in balance, then it becomes very powerful. Don't do too much of one or too much of the other, but balance these things out. Then you will move forward in the right way with these things. It was interesting, I was just driving here last night, coming in from the monastery at about 7:30 or something, coming a bit late because we had some other things we needed to finish off at the monastery, and we were coming up the Kwinana Freeway, and it was getting dark, yeah, and I was looking out the window, and I looking out, and all the lights were out there, and the city was kind of shining, and the freeway was brand new, and there was all these kind of fancy intersections. Everything had been planted very nicely, and it looked like this world had some kind of it looked kind of perfect in a sense, yeah, as if we were controlling the world, making everything run smoothly and all of that. And there was a certain attraction to that world. Just as if you're looking out on a sunny day, you look out there, it looks very beautiful with all the plants out there and the trees flowering, all of this. Yeah, sometimes the world just looks as if we are in control, as if we can make the world kind of, follow our desires, and we can create what we want to create in the world. But then I reminded myself all the strife it takes to get there, yeah? All the arguments that the builders have to build these highways and how difficult it is, all the depletion of the natural resource that is required, all the destruction that goes into this, how just behind the surface, the glamorous surface is already starting to fall apart. In 10 years' time, a brand new highway is going to look much more decrepit. In 20 years' time, it's going to look old, as if it needs replacement. There's this veneer, this external veneer of things being really nice, but just behind the surface, impermanence is already lurking. And sometimes when you think like that, you kind of realize, you look deeper into the sensual world. You see that it is far less interesting than it first appears. Yeah, the surface may look nice, but beneath the surface, all the problems are already lurking here. And this was kind of nice, yeah, because you take away that attraction, that interest in that aspect. Okay, so let's instead go back to the forest and hang out in the forest instead, because this is not really where it is at. Anyway, I'm just giving you some examples here. I'll give you one more example because time is running out quickly. One more example of how I like to think about sensual pleasures sometimes. And one of the interesting things, another of the famous similes of the Buddha that he uses to show the downside of sensory objects and the sensual pleasures of the world, It is the simile of the piece of meat. Yeah, you have a piece of meat, and the Buddha says it is. Imagine the situation where a bird gets hold of a piece of meat. If a bird gets hold of a piece of meat, the bird is very happy. Yeah, a piece of meat, very high currency in the bird world. Yeah, difficult to get hold of. Usually they have to eat kind of scraps and negative things. If you come to our monastery, you see how happy the birds are when they get hold of a piece of meat. Yeah, and they fly away. Yeah, and they kind of take it with them, and another bird comes after it. And this is what this simile says, because the piece of meat is so valuable. As soon as one bird gets hold of it, all the other birds go after it, yeah, clawing at it, trying to rip the piece of meat out of the claws of the first bird. Yeah, and if the first bird does not let go of that piece of meat very quickly, what happens? Well, usually it gets very damaged. Yeah, it gets either injured or it might even die because of the fight that it gets into with other birds that are even larger, even more powerful than itself. That is, the Buddha says, what the sensual world is like. We are always fighting over things. Yeah, the whole sensory world is such that there is a limit in that sensory world. That we fight over the same resources. We fight over the same partners. Yeah. Finally, you get a good partner, then you get jealous because someone else also wants that partner. There's endless problems with these kind of things, and because of that, it is inherent in the sensory world, ill will, conflict, adversity, yeah, all of these things are inherent in that sensual world. You cannot separate those two things out. They always must come together. And this is why when you look at the 5 hindrances, the first of the 5 hindrances is kama, chanda, sensual desire. The second one is ill will, because the second one is very closely related to the first one. And this is so off-putting, isn't it? I don't know, to me it is so off-putting when I know that whenever I'm attracted to that sensory world, whenever I think some kind of stupid thought about that sensory world, I know it is inherent in that. Is also the conflict, the ill will, all the problems, all these kind of really serious problems in the world. Yeah, the wars that we create, all of that is so much related to that particular world. Once you go beyond that world, all of that subsides, but that world is packed with these kind of problems. So remember that again, yeah? It leads to your own suffering in a very powerful way. But again, don't overdo it. Balance it with the other side of the equation, and also find that refuge also within at the same time in your spiritual practice. So it leads to my own suffering, said the Buddha. It leads to other people's suffering. Why? Because it leads to conflict. Yeah, it leads to arguments. It leads to problems. It leads to the suffering of both. You cannot only have the suffering of one. It obstructs wisdom, because when you are attached to the sensual pleasures, you have a vested interest. You can't see clearly, and so it obstructs your ability to know what you should be doing. Causes difficulties. Leads away from nibbana, from extinguishment. Leads in the opposite direction, leads to more rebirth, more attachment in the world. When I considered thus, it subsided in me. Yeah? So if you think about the sensual world in the right way, the desire, the attachment starts to cease. And when it starts to cease, it allows you to go deeper in your meditation. This is, again, one of the biggest hindrances for meditation practice, yeah? That attachment in that world. So if you're able to make that subside, it's going to have a massive impact, or a gradual, but ultimately massive impact on your meditation practice. And then, because of that, you abandon that sensual thought. You remove it. You do away with it. So my main purpose of going through all of this in the connection of dependent origination is simply to show you how we reduce the craving at the point of Vedana and Tanha in dependent origination, how we deal with that, especially using wisdom power. To me, this is such an interesting thing, because, and it's precisely interesting in large part because I think it is often underestimated. It is not taught enough that a large part of the Buddhist practice is about thinking in the right way, gaining that right view of the Dhamma, the same view that the Buddha has, finding your values, finding your interest in the right place, finding meaning in the right place. And as you do that, as you align, you reflect in the right way, gradually the way you think about the world, your view, your outlook, all of these things, they align with how the Buddha thinks about the world. And then your meditation starts to take off. Yeah? And then when your meditation starts to take off, this is what happens. So this is how we go from reducing craving to ending ignorance. Yeah? You keep on reducing it in this way. And as you do that, the 3 kinds of good conduct, you may remember I talked about this before, the Tini Sucharitani, the 3 kinds of good conduct, they get established, yeah, because the 3 kinds of good conduct include the good conduct of the mind. Yeah, 3 kinds are body, speech, and mind. Yeah, so this gets established by this using of wisdom, reducing the defilements, craving going down, the good conduct gets established. And when the good conduct gets established, this allows you to meditate properly. Yeah? Now meditation becomes possible. And through that meditation, as Venerable Munisara rightly pointed out or was questioning, through that meditation, the final craving, the final desires of the mind are abandoned. Yeah? You overcome this finally. And when those final defilements are overcome through the mindfulness meditations, that allows you to practice the 7 awakening factors. Why? Because this is about samadhi, this is about stilling the mind completely, and this can only happen when the 5 hindrances are completely gone. Yeah? So at this point, then, what happens is that you have eliminated the craving completely. This is specifically the craving of sensual pleasures. At this point, it is completely eliminated, temporarily eliminated. Yeah? And then based on the power of that samadhi, yeah, based on the stillness of the mind, the clarity of the mind that you have when you come out of the samadhi, the data that you have gathered through getting to that particular point, because samadhi gives an enormous amount of data about what is really valuable in the world. You have overcome sensuality, you understand the problems with these things. So because of all of these things coming together, this is what then allows you to go to the last one. And that is the overcoming of avidya at the very beginning of dependent origination. Yeah? The first factor of avidya gets eliminated by the arising of true knowledge, or the arising of insight, if you like, and the liberation of the mind. And when that happens, then the craving also is eliminated at the same time, but now it is eliminated permanently. So this is how this comes about, and I just wanted to bring this part of it in today to the dependent origination sequence, just to make it also a bit more practical as well, to bring out some of the practical aspects of this and show how the practical aspects and dependent origination work together in this way. Before we come to the very end, it is already 10:26. I think we already have come to the very end, so sorry about that. So let us stop there. Let's have some nice lunch together, and we'll see you back again at 12:15.